Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Timothy Ash. And of course, this comes at an absolutely pivotal time. It's the third anniversary of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. And it comes at a time where I don't even need to spell it out. Extraordinary stuff happening in the news. And the US seems to be pivoting away from not just Ukrainian survival, but any concept of Ukrainian victory. We're going to unpack some of those topics in the discussion today. Timothy Ash has been a professional economist for more than 30 years, with 2/3 of that in the banking industry. He is also an associate fellow in the Russia and Eurasia program at Chatham House. He's advised various governments on Ukraine-Russia policy and specifically the impact of sanctions. He's also an expert on Turkey and its economy and politics. So we're going to dive into those topics as well. Welcome back.
My pleasure.
Every time we talk, there's no shortage of things to talk about, but the news cycle is accelerating. And of course, it's accelerating in a direction none of us wanted to see. Perhaps some of us have been fearing it may go this way, but I think it's going far faster and further than even someone as cynical as myself could have predicted. What's your impression on the absolute sort of flood of comments and negativity that seems to be coming out of the White House, and in particular Trump's and spat is too mild a word, but falling out with Zelensky?
Well, obviously very disturbing. I mean, I guess given Trump's track record, I think many people were worried, before the US election that, we might see something like this. But I think everyone generally, is pretty shocked at the chain of events that we've seen, both in the Munich Security Conference and then obviously subsequently in the last few days. And there must be massive concern now about whether the US will continue its support to Ukraine, the military support in particular. That's really, really important. I mean, as I've written in various things I've said, there was a chance for a peace deal here. Right. I think whoever would have won the US election, whether it was Harris or Trump, I think both sides actually wanted to sit down at the negotiating table. I think actually Trump had lots of leverage. All the cards were in his hand. Putin wanted peace talks. Sanctions have been hurting the Russian economy has been weakening. Obviously, the military cost has been significant, and Trump could have ramped up sanctions, ramped up support for Ukraine, military support to put more pressure on Putin. And there was lots of things to negotiate around, right? NATO membership, security guarantees, territory, and then the whole sanctions kind of piece. And unfortunately, Trump, the great negotiator, the guy with the art of the deal, has given everything away. I mean, it's just utterly extraordinary, how any negotiator would give the house away to Putin. And I think the Russians they just can't believe their luck. And actually, Moscow is pushing out its maximalist agenda, which, essentially is, no security forces at all, no security for Ukraine, essentially. I think they'll be pushing the limitations on Ukraine's military capability, and also this idea of pushing for early elections, which they know what it means. I mean, that's to destabilize Ukraine. Trump is absolutely wrong, right? I mean, I noticed Gabbard, the head of the security agencies in the US, was commenting that this is unconstitutional. Ukraine, it's not unconstitutional. It's absolutely constitutional. At a time of war, it's constitutional not to have elections in Ukraine, and all political parties have agreed on that. The consequences of, let's say, the scenario that Trump and Putin are playing out, which is a ceasefire deal, then elections, and then some final deal. I mean, early elections, when a firm deal is not agreed, it will mean the end of martial law and mobilization. That will surely deplete Ukraine's front lines. It will see an exodus of men from the country. And that means that Ukraine won't be able to defend itself. And the Russians know this. And Trump has fallen for it. Now, either Trump has no clue on Ukraine, he's clueless on the whole story, or he's a terrible negotiator, or he's an asset of the Russians. I mean, there's one of those three, I think. But it's quite extraordinary, the developments we've seen, and they've weakened Ukraine, undoubtedly. as a consequence of that. But interestingly, I mean, I think from talking to Ukrainians, and certainly the message from Kyiv is actually it's hard and resolved in Ukraine. I mean, they say, well, what is in it for us, right? What is this deal? We're giving everything up. What's the point of that? We may as well just fight on. Things may change in the future. We may get something in the future, right? And it's increased support for Zelensky, I think. We've seen Zaluzhny, the former head of the army, who's seen as a potential competitor in future presidential elections, come out and say, we don't want early presidential elections. Tymoshenko, obviously former prime minister, also came out with a pretty strong statement saying the thing. So it's unified Ukrainian society again behind Zelensky and to basically sustaining the opposition, the defense against Russian aggression.
I mean, even Poroshenko, who is apparently under investigations, former sort of president of Ukraine, even he has said that there's no way you can hold elections at this point. I think the only figure who is pushing for elections is somebody like Arestovich, who is an absolutely marginal figure in Ukrainian politics. And since he has started repeating a lot of very weird Russian-inspired narratives, is widely derided. But you can see the strategic purpose in this, can't you? The strategic purpose is not necessarily even to have an election, but it's to force an election and then declare the result invalid, declare the winner invalid. I don't think Russia, expects or wants validity from electoral process. It wants division. And what are the chances of this being agreed to? Because Ukraine's allies in Europe, none of them are putting pressure for elections, as far as I can tell, unless you're seeing something different.
Well, I mean, the reality is that early elections, or elections, I should say, would more likely, well, either Zelensky may win them now, given the rallying support behind him, or you'll end up with someone who, like Zaluzhny, who's you could argue is more hardline on peace negotiation. He's argued for full mobilization, Ukraine going on to full war footings. I mean, the irony is unbelievable that an autocracy, a dictatorship, Russia, that has seen two presidents in 25 years. One of them was the shoe-in between Putin and Medvedev, and where opposition politicians are killed, are murdered by the regime, is calling out, a country like Ukraine that has had multiple, tens of presidential parliamentary elections. I think has had 5 or 6 presidents in the period since independence. Transition of power have been smooth. Elections have been free and fair. I mean, it's extraordinary for Russia to try and call out Ukraine as not being democratic, and for Trump to take the bait is utterly extraordinary. Zelensky is not a dictator. Putin is the dictator. That should be crystal clear to everyone. And you have to question Trump's motives for saying that kind of thing. And the whole of his team. I mean, are they sycophants, or do they not understand how important this is? Do they care more about their jobs than actually calling out the truth on something that should be a number one national security interest for the West, not just Europe? But anyway, they should look into their consciences, I guess, in the future.
There must be people who fulfill that category. There must be some who, unfortunately, believe some of these narratives. And I certainly hear from friends in the GOP, there are some who are sucked in, but there are also grifters, many, many grifters in that sphere as well. And they're very easy for Russia to suck in. Let's take that phrase you use, mobilization, because at this pivotal moment, it suggests that 2 forms of mobilization are essential for Ukraine's survival, if not for eventual victory. One is the mobilization of Ukrainian society and potentially lowering the age of conscription, something that's long been resisted. The other mobilization would seem to be Britain and certain European allies to move unilaterally and no longer wait for the US and its processes and its negotiations. This is something I've been sort of thinking. It seems there is still a sort of institutional I was going to lethargy because that's not what it is. There's an institutional consensus that suggests we should wait to see what happens in the US. We should wait to see what US strategy is. Do you think it would be too late if we wait around?
Look, Ukraine can fight on. I think there's a willingness now in the population, realization that, why accept a bad deal? Something like 40% of munitions are now made in Ukraine. I think Europe will continue to supply finance and some munitions. Obviously, the US is critical for particularly some of the air defense weapons, but I think there is an ability to fight on for six months, maybe a year. Russia hasn't proven able to take much more territory. It's been brutal on the ground, and I think militarily, I don't think Russia has the ability to take and hold a significant amount of territory. Europe still has options, and one of the positives is Ukraine's finances are in reasonably good shape. They're still, they've got 40 odd billion in foreign exchange reserves. There's still the availability of this 50 billion ERA, which is the interest stream on frozen Russian assets, or debt secured on the back of the interest stream on frozen Russian assets. And there's I think a 40 billion plus left of the EU macro financial assistance program. So Ukraine has well over $100 billion of finance that could get it through the year. That's been about more or less the cost of funding the war. And it could use that money to buy munitions, right? Hopefully Trump wouldn't reject a big fat check coming his way to buy weapons. And, it does, the easiest thing for Europe to do, again, is this frozen Russian asset issue. It's just ridiculous that Europe is sitting on well in excess of 200 billion of Central Bank of Russia assets, most in Belgium. The ECB has been blocking it. I would challenge the ECB. Their main concern is the impacts on the euro as a reserve currency and trust in the euro as a reserve currency. What's going to be trust in Europe and confidence in the euro if Ukraine falls because we fail to adequately finance and arm them? What do you think your precious euro is going to do then? The need is now. Absolutely, we just need to sign the money over to a fund. It can be managed by Europeans and the Ukrainians, but essentially to be available for the Ukrainians to fund their own defense, right? Again, purchases from the Americans, lots of places in the world that Ukrainians can buy munitions beyond the US. But having access to that cash is going to be critical to sustaining Ukraine's defense in the absence of support from the Americans, basically. And remember, likely, if we don't do that soon, the Trump administration will likely sign a lot of that money back over to Russia. I mean, that would be extraordinary. That Europe and Ukraine loses. That money gets paid back. The aggressor doesn't pay anything for Ukraine's recovery and reconstruction. It gets away scot-free. I mean, morally, that would be an utter disaster, right? And again, I would just ask European politicians, stop talking, act, do. Easy to do, really easy to do. It requires a few signatures, not difficult. Cash is sitting in bank accounts, right? It's just the ECB and a few treasuries in European countries that are blocking it. It needs to be done. You're either serious about European security or you're not. And I don't think the ECB leadership should be taking these decisions, actually. It's about European national security. So those decisions should be taken out of their hands.
And maybe some of their relationships should be investigated, possibly some of their relationships, who knows, to Russia, perhaps. I mean, the question there, this is obviously a long shot, but in the current climate, and I've been arguing for a while, I'm not an expert on these things, and some who are experts, some who are within NATO structures have sort of, I wouldn't say poo-pooed it, but they're like, this is alarmist. But I put the idea that Article 5 no longer actually is an instrument of deterrence anymore. Now, what if one of the Baltics was overrun by Russia in one of the worst case scenarios? They're in the euro. What would it mean for the European project to have countries in the EU, in the euro currency, controlled by Russia. I mean, the entire edifice of European system and dream essentially is broken at that point, as well as NATO and all these other security structures.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the damage done by Hegseth and Vance at Munich was extraordinary. I find it incredible to say this, but I think NATO is dead, right? I mean, Europe is on its own. It's crystal clear. We cannot, the US is no longer a dependable ally for Europe, right? If Trump really thinks it's better to ally with Putin, the guy who has invaded 3 European countries, has killed people with weapons of mass destruction on the streets of the UK, is constantly doing malign activity against European democracies, has tried to assassinate the leader of, or the CEO of the main German arms manufacturer. That if Trump thinks that it's fine to cut deals and be in allegiance with Moscow, then I think our interests and values are quite different from the Americans, and we have to think elsewhere. And you're right. I think Putin will look to test what's left of Article 5. I mean, the Baltic states must be very nervous at this stage, right? Can they defend themselves? Is European NATO able to help them? Because Putin is definitely willing to do it, right? I have no doubts. And again, I've covered Russia in its various guises since the mid-80s. It's almost 40 years covering this space. I have no doubt that Putin has the willingness to go further in Europe beyond Ukraine. No doubt. And most of the Putin and Russia watchers I know and follow are the same view, right? So that's the harsh reality. So if the Americans think that they have different interests and values, then we need to think about other arrangements in Europe. And obviously, it's our fault, Europeans' fault. We haven't taken the threat from Russia seriously enough for a long time. We haven't taken the need to bolster our own security. Yes, we've been over-reliant on the Americans, so we need to wake up very quickly. And obviously, finance is a key part of that. The immobilized Russian assets in European jurisdictions would be really, really important in backstopping Ukrainian finance and the military component, but also Europe itself. We need to move really, really fast. I also find it pretty extraordinary, actually, that Macron convened that meeting of larger European powers in Paris, didn't include Turkey. I mean, how is that possible? Turkey has the biggest armed forces in European NATO. It's done a lot to support Ukraine in terms of provision of drones. Why wasn't Turkey invited? That's utterly extraordinary. The one country in Europe, European NATO, that is able to field tens of thousands of troops to help secure a peace is Turkey. And it's not invited. I mean, it just is utterly extraordinary.
And of course, Zelensky, I think, understands that, because shortly after that summit was convened, he actually visited Turkey, visited Erdogan, and emphasized the importance of Turkey in this European concert, balance of powers, these kind of things. And Erdogan has shown in the last couple of days, he said some extraordinary things about recovering Ukrainian sovereign territory, not recognizing not just the occupation of Donbass, but the occupation of Crimea. And he has condemned quite unequivocally Russia's imperialistic attempts to dominate the region and dominate Ukraine and the Black Sea.
Yes, and he's reaffirmed Turkey's support for Ukraine's NATO membership, right, which is certainly a positive. Again, Europe has its problems. The relationship between Turkey is a difficult one, right? There's fault on both sides, I would say. But unfortunately, I'd say it's underlying this is a xenophobia, right? I mean, that reluctance to engage with Turkey on this issue. We have to. I would argue that in the face of the Russian threat, we need to boost military industrial cooperation with the Turks. They have a huge army. They have a big military industrial complex. They have particular specialisms, particularly in drones, the Bayraktar, the Baykar Bayraktar kind of drones and company. Excel, interesting. Baikar recently bought an aeronautical company in Italy, right? So, we need to do more of that, right? In our own interest, in our own defense, right? And the Russians are no real friends of, the Turks are no real friends of the Russians. They get the threat, absolutely, right? But they're very transactional, and they understand that, they have supplied significant munitions to Ukraine, and the quid pro quo for that has unfortunately been that they've had to pay for Russian gas and take Russian tourists, right? And but needs must, and I think the Ukrainians certainly appreciate what Turkey has done for them, and they can do a lot more in terms of any peace because they have the military capability.
So I'm going to follow up on this episode with a conversation with Keir Giles and others to look at more of the military side. But could we turn to the economics of mobilization? Because if, as you say, the Western powers, really led by Britain, I think, and of course France is taking sort of a lead there as well. But if this effort to support Ukraine is going to be a European-led one, what are the implications? If we look at the increase on military spending anywhere from sort of 3.5 to 5%, which are numbers that are doing the rounds, what kind of a revolutionary change is that going to be in Britain? And are there things like a deferment of nuclear deterrent payments that could then be channeled towards, more conventional arms? Because a huge part of our defense budget is taken up by nuclear deterrent, which at this point seems to be pretty useless in the current circumstances. Or would a major mobilization required if we are going to submit, say, a security force on the territory of Ukraine? Could that actually not? Is budget an unrealistic way for that to come out? Will we need some kind of war bond, as happened in World War I and World War II?
Well, the UK has its own specific problems, right? We're in a difficult economic situation. We have large levels of public debt. We have a big budget deficit. Obviously, markets are very focused on our vulnerabilities, right? So Reeves, the Chancellor, is constrained. I think there is the understanding in the leadership in the UK that we need to increase defence spending, but there's the economic and market realities of how do we do it? How do we get it funded, right? Interesting. Putting a few things together, I don't think the Ukrainians would mind at all if Europe released the 200 billion plus of immobilized Russian assets to divert those to fund a security force to be deployed in its defence in Ukraine itself, right? The UK military budget's about $60 billion, so it puts some perspective on, potentially releasing the 200 billion plus of immobilized Russian assets. Actually, in the UK, we have something like $25 billion of immobilized Russian assets in cash in the UK. So, that would cover more or less half UK's annual defence spending. That would be more than enough to cover the cost of increased military spending associated with a defence operation or security operation in Ukraine, right? And remember, the total amount of immobilized Russian assets in Western jurisdictions is about central bank itself, 330 billion total. Immobilized Russian assets about 400 billion total. So, if we release the whole amount, it would more than cover, a significant military intervention or security operation in Ukraine. I guess the problem is it's not really the finance. I don't think finance is the problem here. The problem is simply getting the kit quickly enough, right? And Europe has wasted the last 3 years in terms of not rebuilding its military industrial complex. So we're not able to field the tanks, the aircraft, and the troops that's required. It's not really a problem of money. It's a problem of production of the technology itself, military technology itself, right?
And of course, Denmark has shown the way, actually, in a very great deal of foresight, and that is investing in manufacturing capability in Ukraine itself, and realizing that can actually happen much faster if you enable Ukraine's military-industrial complex rather than building that from the ground up in expensive Western economies.
Yeah, no, the Ukrainians say themselves. Around 40% of their munitions are now made in the country. So that gives them ability to sustain a defense for some time. although it's only relatively low tech stuff they make. Obviously they make some long range missiles, but unfortunately the resupply of things like Patriot missiles and HIMARS, that comes from the States, right? So in the end, you have to go to Trump, with a big check and say, will you sell me these, please, for the defense of Ukraine? I mean, that's the question. I think if the check's big enough, Trump will not say no. And, if you, I argued on the $330 billion of immobilized Russian assets, create a specific fund, the Defense of Democracy in Europe Fund, call it the Trump Fund for the Defense of Democracy in Europe, and take that to him and say, look, we're willing to spend $300 billion over the next 10 years buying US kit. It could be $500 billion. I mean, if you put it into perspective, if Europe steps up from, it's a $25 trillion economy, Europe, in effect. So 2% of GDP defense spending is roughly 500 billion. Each percentage point is 250 billion, right? Let's say we're going to go to 4% of GDP. That's about $1 trillion of defense spending. US spends about 800 billion. If we're going to $1 trillion, I would imagine a lot of that will be spent buying US equipment, right? Europe can be a huge market for the US defense sector. And, if Europe and Ukraine go to Trump and say, we want to commit 500 billion of defense purchases over the next 10 years, 50 billion a year, will be the biggest defense sale contract ever. And, put Trump's name on it. He likes those kind of things. I don't think he could say no, right? Just the number of jobs that would create, right? So, we have to be cleverer. Our politicians have sat on their backsides, I'm afraid, for 3 years, not done very much, right? They've been to Kyiv, they've had photo opportunities, whatever, with Zelensky, but they've gone back home and they haven't done anything, right? I mean, we haven't really increased our ability to make stuff in Europe. Interestingly, going back to Turkey, Turkey does have the manufacturing capability. It can scale up very quickly to make a lot of tanks and military equipment and 155mm shells. So we need to be working. We need to be cleverer now. Russia is an existential threat to Europe. Europe, with Turkey, has to come up for solutions, right? And I think Turkey would be a willing partner in this defense, because it has no interests in the Black Sea being dominated by Russia. It has no interests in Russia taking over Ukraine and its military-industrial complex. It's a rival in many places. Syria has been one, obviously, that has been in the focus in recent months. So Turkey has an interest, I think, in keeping Ukraine sovereign and secure, and also Europe sovereign and secure. And it would certainly help its economy if we see more cooperation in the defense sector between Europe and the Turks.
Now, there's just one more question, and that's not because there aren't endless things to talk about. I know you're in a rush. My phone's about to run out of battery as well, so we'll hopefully get one more question in. And this is unfortunate because, yes, Trump may well be attracted by the idea of huge defense contracts, but there is also discussion about him lifting sanctions against Russia. And as you say, it's just to the point where Russia is incredibly weak and Putin's war machine is stalling. This could provide the money, the oxygen that machine needs to sort of rev up again. So he may well sell arms to the West. He may well also be minded to sell arms and machine tools to Russia as well. And of course, we have these conversations around Trump trying to extort Ukraine for access to not just the rare earth minerals, metals, etc., that of course form the newspaper headlines. If you dig deep into the contract that he tried to get Zelensky to sign, there's also vague wording about control of ports, export facilities, logistics, corn, grain, the whole lot. He wants to steal Ukraine's wealth. This, unfortunately, is another plan that's embedded in there. It's one of the reasons clearly he's upset with Zelensky. What are the risks here of lifting sanctions and actually treating allies as something to be extorted, ripped off, and in Ukraine's case, its resources raped?
Well, again, utterly incredible. I think anyone who's read the document that Treasury Secretary Besant went to Kyiv with, I think, would be left in shock. I mean, the US essentially committed to nothing, really, nothing nothing clear cut, nothing specific in terms of either financial or military support for Ukrainians. But the suggestion was pretty clear. It gets 50% of almost everything. I mean, that's extraordinary, really, if you think about it. I mean, the blood that Ukrainians have bled for democracy and Europe and Western security, and for the Americans to go over and try and demand that back. I mean, there's been talk of a $500 billion payback for the Americans. They've only actually spent about $115 billion. I mean, that's the reality. So it's a 5-to-1 payback. That's utterly extraordinary, right? And the suggestion that they're kind of playing the Russians off against the Ukrainians, again, I mean, morally repugnant, I think, and not something that you would expect of an ally, right? And I think Europe has now got the message, right? The Americans are no longer a trusted ally. They're an adversary. We have different interests. We have different values. We need to come up with our own security and defense infrastructure, etc. So, I mean, incredible couple of weeks. I think no one really imagined, even with the Trump presidency, that it would be this bad. But I'd leave on one final point. I mean, I get the US has its own interests, right? I mean, it views China as its number one strategic competitor risk. I get that, right? But that China is not our number one national security risk. Russia is. Now, if the US wants our assistance in the future in helping it in that future competition with China and potentially a military clash with China, I think they need to be a bit more understanding of our own interests and what is important to us. Otherwise, when that battle with China eventually happens, Europe's not going to be there like it was after 9/11. The US will be on its own. So, people like Hegseth and Vance need to think pretty clearly about that. You are losing loyal allies that have fought alongside you in Afghanistan, in Iraq, and shed blood and treasure, with the US. I mean, do you really want that, right? I mean, it seems very short-sighted. I mean, it's almost like a cowboy. It's not a cowboy kind of policy. It's a bandits. It's a policy of a banditry, a pirate.
It's mafia. It's mafia-led, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's just utterly extraordinary kind of a shift. And I think the message globally to everyone is the US cannot be trusted. I mean, that's a message that will, go out. If allies cannot rely on the Americans, no one can.
Thanks so much for coming back on. It's a shame that it is such a turbulent and disturbing time. But I think now's the time to be in action. You've thrown up plenty of ideas that hopefully will inspire Western policymakers, those in charge of the world's major democracies, which the US is rapidly, I think, ceasing to be considered amongst. Thanks so much for coming on. Thank you for everything you do there. And we'll put links to your profile, Substack, and so on in the description of the video.
Great. Thank you. Good to speak. Cheers, yeah.